The clatter of dishes and the low hum of after-work chatter were the soundtrack of Juniper's life. She moved between the red vinyl booths of the Moonlight Diner like a ghost, a tray balanced on her palm. To most customers, she was just a pair of hands that brought coffee and pie, a face they never really looked at. She was used to being invisible, a skill she'd perfected over years of blending into the background. But Juniper noticed everything. The way a couple held hands a little too tightly, the tired slump of a trucker's shoulders, the fake cheer in a lonely regular's voice. She saw the world in its tiny, telling details. The bell above the door jingled, cutting through the diner's warmth. Two men stepped out of the chilly evening, and the air in the room seemed to shift and cool. The first was broad-shouldered and serious, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced, watchful intensity. This was Reese. He held himself like a shield. But it was the man behind him who stole the very breath from Juniper's lungs. He was tall, with an elegant grace that seemed out of place among the chipped formica and neon signs. His name was Cashin. He moved with a quiet power, a king entering a common tavern, yet his dark eyes held a shadow of weariness. He wore a simple black coat that looked impossibly expensive, and when he shrugged it off, the sharp lines of his suit jacket made him look both powerful and tragically untouchable. He slid into a corner booth, the one shrouded in the most shadow, and Reese took the seat facing the door, his back straight, a silent sentinel. Juniper's heart did a funny little flip-flop against her ribs. She forced her feet to move, grabbing her notepad and approaching their table. The scent of Cashin's cologne, something like sandalwood and stormy air, hit her as she got closer. It was dizzying. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice thankfully steady. Reese ordered 2 black coffees, his tone clipped, his eyes never still. Cashin didn't speak. He merely gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze fixed on the salt shaker as if it held the answers to a deep, personal mystery. Juniper felt a strange pang, a desire to know what thoughts lay behind those brooding eyes. She brought their coffees, the ceramic mugs clinking softly as she set them down. It was then, as she turned to leave, that she saw it. A detail so small, so easy to miss. Cashin reached for his mug. His hand, which had looked so strong and capable, was trembling. Not a shiver, but a fine, uncontrollable tremor that made the dark liquid swirl precariously close to the rim. He curled his fingers, trying to stop it, a flicker of frustration crossing his handsome face. Juniper paused, her waitress instincts warring with a sudden, sharp concern. She watched him take a hesitant sip. A sheen of sweat, glistening under the diner's dim lights, had broken out on his pale forehead. He blinked slowly, his focus seeming to drift in and out. He looked lost, adrift in a way that had nothing to do with the noisy diner. Reese, however, was staring out the window, watching the rain begin to patter against the glass, completely unaware of the silent battle happening just across the table. "Something is wrong," Juniper's mind screamed. This wasn't just tiredness. A memory, sharp and clear, sliced through her panic. Her little cousin, at a family picnic, had eaten a cookie with a hidden nut. He'd gotten the same confused look, the same strange paleness, before his lips had started to swell. Anaphylaxis, the paramedic had called it. A race against time. Her feet were moving before her brain could talk her out of it. The rules, don't bother important-looking customers, don't make a scene, evaporated. She walked right up to their table, her apron stained with coffee and ketchup, her heart hammering a wild, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She ignored Reese, whose attention had snapped to her the moment she invaded their space. All her focus was on Cashin. He looked up, and for a heart-stopping second, his dark, clouded eyes locked with hers. The world narrowed to just the two of them. There was a vulnerability there, a silent plea she felt deep in her soul. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but urgent, cutting through the low hum of the diner. She leaned in slightly, close enough to catch that intoxicating scent of sandalwood mixed with the sharp, sour tang of sweat. "Please, listen to me. You're not well. I think you need a doctor. Right now." Cashin's brow furrowed, as if trying to place her from a dream. He opened his mouth to speak, to dismiss her, but no sound came out. His eyes widened in sudden, dawning horror, not at her, but at the invisible enemy closing his throat. Reese was half out of his seat, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Step away from him," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. It was too late. A strangled, guttural sound escaped Cashin's lips. His body went rigid, his shoulders slamming back against the vinyl booth. The coffee mug slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the table with a crack, sending a dark river of liquid spilling across the formica. Then, in a horrifying, slow-motion collapse, his body slid sideways, crumpling onto the worn checkerboard floor. Chaos erupted. A woman at the counter screamed. Reese was on his knees in an instant, his professional cool shattered, his face a mask of raw panic. He was shouting Cashin's name, shaking his shoulder, completely lost. "Cashin! Boss! Talk to me!" But Juniper's world had gone quiet and clear. She dropped to the floor beside him, the sticky floor clinging to her knees. She didn't see the powerful son of a dangerous man. She saw a person who was dying. "It's an allergic reaction," she said to Reese, her voice astonishingly calm, a rock in the storm. "A severe one. Is there an EpiPen? Does he carry one?" Reese stared at her, his mind blank with terror. He fumbled through Cashin's jacket pockets, his own hands shaking now. "Nothing. Call an ambulance." Juniper yelled over her shoulder to the stunned cook. "No. Tell them it's anaphylactic shock." She turned back to Cashin. His lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. Her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her hands were steady. She tilted his head back, checking his airway, her fingers brushing against the stubble on his jaw. His skin was cold and clammy. "Stay with me," she whispered, her face close to his. "They're coming. Just hold on." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. The flashing red and blue lights painted the diner's windows in frantic strokes. The paramedics burst in, a whirlwind of efficiency, pushing Juniper and Reese aside. They worked quickly, injecting him with epinephrine, fitting an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. As they lifted his limp body onto the stretcher, a miracle happened. The powerful medicine surged through his veins, fighting back the darkness. Cashin's eyelids fluttered. His gaze, weak and hazy, swept across the frantic scene until it found her. Juniper was standing there, her hands clasped tightly under her chin, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Their eyes met. In that single, electric moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. There was confusion, a dawning recognition, and a profound, soul-deep gratitude. As they wheeled him past, his hand, which had been lying limp at his side, moved. With a tremendous effort, his fingers stretched out, brushing against her hand. He didn't just touch her. His weak, cold fingers curled, managing a faint, deliberate squeeze. Then he was gone, rushed out into the rain and into the waiting ambulance, leaving Juniper standing alone in the middle of the chaotic diner. The spot on her hand where his fingers had rested burned like a brand. The ghost of his touch, the storm in his eyes, and the terrifying nearness of his death were seared into her memory. The invisible girl had been seen, and in seeing, she had saved a king. And she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that her quiet, predictable life was over. The week after the diner incident passed in a blur of routine and restless energy for Juniper. Every clatter of a dish, every jingle of the doorbell, made her heart leap into her throat. She found herself staring at the corner booth, the ghost of Cashin's collapse replaying behind her eyes. The memory of his faint, cold hand squeezing hers was a brand on her skin, a secret she carried through her shifts. She was sure she would never see him again. He was a prince from a shadowy kingdom, and she was just the girl who'd briefly stepped into his path. She was wiping down the counter long after her shift had ended, the diner empty and silent, when the bell chimed again. Her head snapped up. He was there. Cashin stood just inside the door, the rain from a week ago replaced by a clear, starry night framing him through the glass. He looked different. The terrifying paleness was gone, replaced by a healthy, warm glow. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, looking less like a king and more like a man, but the power in his stance was undeniable. Beside him, a step behind as always, was Reese, whose usual stern expression seemed to have softened by a single, grudging degree. "We're closed," Juniper said, her voice a fragile thing in the quiet room. "I'm not here for coffee," Cashin replied. His voice was deeper than she remembered, a rich, smooth sound that washed over her. He took a few steps forward, until only the counter separated them. His dark eyes, now clear and intensely focused, held hers. "I'm here for you." Juniper's breath hitched. She clutched the damp cloth in her hand, her knuckles turning white. "You saved my life," he said, the words simple and heavy with meaning. "The doctors said another minute, well." He shook his head as if to dispel the dark thought. "It wasn't an accident, Juniper. It was poison. Someone put something in my food before I arrived at the diner. Your quick thinking, your bravery, you saw what everyone else, including my most trusted friend, missed." He glanced at Reese, who gave a slight, apologetic nod. Poison. The word hung in the air, sinister and cold. It confirmed the dangerous world he lived in, a world of shadows and enemies. It should have terrified her, sent her running. But all she felt was a fierce, protective surge. I just did what anyone would have done," she whispered. "No," Cashin said, his voice firm, his gaze piercing. "No one else did. Only you." He invited her to dinner. A proper thank you, he called it. A voice in her head, the one that valued safety and a predictable life, screamed at her to say no. But the memory of his hand in hers, the look in his eyes as he lay on the floor, was louder. She heard herself say yes. That first dinner was at a restaurant where the lights were low and the silverware gleamed. Juniper felt like a fish out of water, but Cashin never made her feel that way. He asked her questions, about her life, her dreams, the books she loved, and he actually listened to her answers. He made her feel fascinating. In return, he was guarded, but he offered her small, precious pieces of himself. He told her he loved classical art, that he painted landscapes in secret to quiet his mind, and that his favorite sound was rain on a tin roof. It became a secret rhythm. Reese would pick her up in a discreet, dark car after her shift. They would go to quiet, hidden places, a small gallery showcasing a forgotten artist, a private garden closed to the public, a jazz club where the music was a low, thrumming heartbeat. They were always watching, always careful. The danger was a constant, uninvited guest, but it only made their time together feel more precious, more intense. He was a man of contrasts. He could command a room with a single look, yet he held doors open for her with an old-world courtesy. His hands, which she knew could wield terrible power, were incredibly gentle. One night, he drove her up a winding road to a hill that overlooked the entire city. The lights twinkled below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was cool and clean, a world away from the greasy smell of the diner. They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching, the space between them humming with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. "It's beautiful," Juniper breathed. Cashin turned to look at her, not at the view. "It is," he said, his voice low. She felt his gaze and turned to meet it. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, making them look like star-filled skies. He reached out, and his fingers, warm and sure, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was so light, yet it sent a jolt of lightning through her entire body, leaving a trail of fire on her skin. She shuddered, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. He didn't pull away. His thumb gently stroked her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers, asking a silent question. The world narrowed to his touch, his scent, the quiet intensity of his face. The hum between them grew into a roar in her ears. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in. Their first kiss was not one of hunger, but of discovery. It was soft, achingly slow, a tentative meeting of two worlds. His lips were warm and firm against hers, a perfect, gentle fit. It was a kiss full of unspoken promises, of safety, of desire, of a connection so profound it scared them both. When he finally pulled back, just an inch, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, their ragged breaths mingling in the cool night air. No words were needed. Everything had changed. After that, their secret meetings were filled with a new, intoxicating intimacy. The goodnight kisses at her doorstep were no longer brief pecks. They were lingering, deep explorations that made her knees weak and her head spin. He would press her gently against her front door, his strong arms caging her in, his body a solid, warm wall against hers. She would wind her fingers into his soft, dark hair, pulling him closer, losing herself in the taste of him, the feel of him. In the dark sanctuary of his car, he would hold her, her head resting on his shoulder, his chin on her hair. They whispered in the quiet darkness, sharing stories from their childhood, their deepest fears, their most fragile hopes. He confessed his fear of the legacy he was born into. She confessed her dream of one day owning a little bookstore. He wasn't Cashin, the son of a powerful, dangerous man. He was just Cashin, the man who loved the rain and held her as if she were the most precious, breakable thing in the world. She was falling, deeper and faster than she ever thought possible. She saw it reflected in his eyes, the same dizzying, terrifying, wonderful freefall. They were two lost souls from opposite ends of the universe, who had found a home in each other's arms. In the quiet moments, wrapped in his embrace, the dangerous world outside faded away, and all that was left was the whisper of his promises and the forever she could feel blooming in her heart. The stolen moments of happiness felt like a dream, a beautiful, fragile bubble that Juniper knew couldn't last. The real world, Cashin's world, was one of shadows and sharp edges, and it was only a matter of time before it pierced their perfect sanctuary. The intrusion came not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. Cashin's texts, which had been a constant, warm presence throughout her days, stopped. The secret drives with Reese never came. For 3 agonizing days, there was nothing but a void where his love had been. Juniper felt the absence like a physical ache, a cold dread settling in the pit of her stomach. She knew. His world had finally found them. On the 4th day, he came to her. He didn't take her to a hilltop or a quiet gallery. He stood in the alley behind the diner, the setting sun casting long, grim shadows. He looked like he had in the diner that first night, pale, his eyes haunted, the weariness back in his soul. "Juniper," he began, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. He couldn't even look at her. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling, already knowing the answer. "My father, he knows about you." Cashin finally met her gaze, and the pain she saw there made her want to crumble. "He sees you as a weakness. A target. A common waitress who can be used to get to me." He spat the words, his father's venom still fresh. "He says I have to end this. For your safety. For the family's." He was pushing her away. She could see the terrible, heartbreaking effort it took. He was trying to build a wall between them with his own 2 hands, brick by painful brick. "So, that's it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything? You're just going to let him tell you who to love?" "It's not about letting him, Juniper. It's about keeping you alive," he exploded, his control shattering. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration and fear pouring out. "You don't understand the people in my world. If they see you as a way to hurt me, they will not hesitate. They will take you, they will hurt you, and I couldn't live with that. It's over." The words were a physical blow. He turned to leave, his shoulders set in a line of finality. For a moment, the world went gray. The hope she had nurtured, the future she had painted in her mind with him, shattered into a million pieces. But as she watched his retreating back, something fierce and stubborn ignited within her. It was the same part of her that had seen the tremor in his hand when no one else did. The part that had knelt on a dirty diner floor and refused to let him go. "Cashin, stop." Her voice, strong and clear, echoed in the narrow alley. He froze, but didn't turn. She marched up to him, grabbing his arm and forcing him to face her. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes blazed with a fire he had never seen. "You don't get to make this choice for me," she said, her voice shaking with emotion but unwavering in its conviction. "You think your world is so dangerous? My world before you was empty. It was serving coffee and going home to a silent apartment. It was being invisible. You showed me what it feels like to be seen. To be loved. She took a shaky breath, her grip on his arm tightening. Your world is dangerous, Cashin. But my world is empty without you. And I am not afraid of any of it, if I am with you. Her words broke through the fortress he had built around his heart. They washed over him, not as a plea, but as a declaration. She wasn't a fragile thing to be protected and locked away. She was a warrior, his warrior, standing in a dirty alley and fighting for him with everything she had. The mask of cold resignation crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. God, Juniper, he choked out, his own body trembling. I can't lose you. Then don't, she whispered into his neck, holding him just as tightly. Fight for me. Fight for us. And he did. The confrontation with his father was not a shouting match, but a quiet, seismic shift in power. Cashin stood in the opulent, cold study, a room he had always feared, and looked the old man in the eye. Her name is Juniper, Cashin said, his voice calm and lethally steady. She is not a weakness. She is my strength. She saw death on my face and fought it back when everyone else was blind. She is not a phase or a distraction. She is my future. And if your world cannot accept her, then I will leave your world behind. He was choosing her. Not out of rebellion, but out of love. And for the first time, his father, a man who dealt in threats and violence, saw a force even he could not control. A son who had found something worth more than any legacy. A week later, Reese drove them to a private botanical garden, the air heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Cashin led her by the hand down a path lit by flickering lanterns until they reached a secluded clearing. And there, Juniper's breath caught in her throat. Hundreds of tiny, twinkling fairy lights were woven through the branches of an ancient willow tree, creating a canopy of shimmering stars. It was a piece of their hilltop, brought down to earth and made even more magical. Cashin turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft glow. He took both of her hands in his. Juniper, he began, his voice thick with emotion. You once told me you felt invisible. But from the moment I saw you, you were the only person I could see. You saw the real me, hidden behind the fear and the duty. You saw the man who was drowning, and you reached out your hand. He squeezed her hands, his eyes glistening. You saved my life that night in the diner. He slowly, deliberately, lowered himself to one knee. Juniper's hands flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. He looked up at her, his love and devotion shining brighter than all the lights in the sky. Now, he whispered, pulling a simple, breathtaking diamond ring from his pocket. Will you make it worth living? Juniper, my love, my savior, my everything, will you marry me? There were no hesitations, no doubts. Only a soaring, perfect joy that filled every part of her soul. Yes, she cried, the word bursting forth on a wave of happy tears. Yes, Cashin, 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, a permanent promise. As he stood, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around under the twinkling lights. When he set her down, he cradled her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not like their first, gentle kiss or their many passionate ones. This was a kiss of forever. It was deep and passionate and full of every unspoken vow, every shared dream, every battle they had won to reach this moment. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of a life built not on fear, but on a love that had stared into the darkness and refused to blink. They had chosen each other. Against the world, against the danger, against all odds. And in that kiss, under a canopy of man-made stars, they knew their forever had finally begun. Did this story of fierce love and brave choices make your heart race? If you believed in Juniper and Cashin's fight for their forever, then subscribe to the channel now. We have so many more stories of passion, danger, and unforgettable romance waiting just for you. We love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what you thought about Juniper's brave stand and Cashin's beautiful proposal. Are you Team Juniper? Let us know your thoughts down below. The jingle of the old diner's door was the best sound Francisca had heard all night. It meant the last customer was gone, and her 12-hour shift was finally over. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. With a tired sigh, she slid into a cracked vinyl booth and pulled a worn envelope from her apron. Carefully, she spilled the night's tips onto the table. Coins clinked and a few crumpled bills unfolded. She counted slowly, her heart sinking. It was less than she'd hoped. She divided the money into two mental piles. This smaller stack was for her rent, due in 3 days. The larger, dreamier pile was for nursing school. It was a far-off mountain she was climbing 1 penny at a time. Just as she was smoothing out a $5 bill, the sharp ring of the diner's phone shattered the silence. Francisca jumped. No one called this late. It was probably a wrong number. She thought about letting it ring. But what if it was her landlord? With a knot of worry in her stomach, she walked to the counter and picked up the receiver. "Hello, Moonlight Diner," she said, her voice rough with tiredness. The sound on the other end was not an adult. It was the ragged, hitched breathing of a child trying not to sob. Hello," a small, trembling voice whispered. Francisca's weariness vanished, replaced by instant alertness. "Hi there," she said, her voice softening. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" My dad," the boy stammered, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He's on the floor. There's red stuff everywhere. A pool of it. He won't wake up. He won't answer me." A full-blown cry finally broke through. "Please. I'm scared." Francisca's blood ran cold. A pool of red. Her mind, trained by countless hours dreaming of being a nurse, conjured the image instantly. Blood. A lot of it. Her grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. This wasn't a prank, this was pure terror. "Okay. Sweetie, listen to me," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm, a stark contrast to the panic rising in her own chest. "What's your name?" "Leo," he cried. "Okay, Leo. My name is Francisca. You are being so brave. I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you tell me your address?" Leo recited an address on the other side of the city, a neighborhood of big, quiet houses she only ever delivered takeout to. Her first thought was to tell him to call an ambulance. But he was just a little boy, alone and terrified. What if he couldn't explain? What if they were too slow? The image of a man bleeding out on a floor while his son watched was too much to bear. "I'm coming, Leo," she said, making a decision that would change everything. "I'm coming right now. Don't open the door for anyone else, you understand? Only me." She hung up the phone, her heart thudding against her ribs. Her eyes darted back to the booth, to the sad little piles of money that represented her future. Without another thought, she swept all of it, every last coin and bill, into her apron pocket, grabbed her jacket, and ran out into the cold night, not even bothering to lock the diner door behind her. Her old car coughed and sputtered to life. The drive was a blur of streetlights and frantic thoughts. She pushed the car faster than she should have, Leo's terrified sobs echoing in her mind. She found the house, a dark, massive shape looming behind a tall iron gate. It was fancy, just like she'd guessed, but it felt strangely empty and silent. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open slowly. "Leo? It's Francisca," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast, expensive space. A small figure darted out from the shadows of a hallway and latched onto her legs, burying his face in her worn jeans. He was a little boy with messy dark hair and huge, tear-filled eyes. He pointed a shaking finger towards a grand living room. Francisca's breath caught in her throat. There, on a beautiful, expensive Persian rug, lay a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a once white shirt that was now stained a shocking, wet crimson. One of his hands was stretched out, as if he'd been trying to crawl for help. His skin was pale, almost gray. A dark pool of blood had soaked into the rug beneath his torso, and the metallic smell of it filled the air. For a terrifying second, Francisca thought she was too late. But then she saw the faint, shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was alive, but only just. "See," Leo whimpered, his small body trembling against her. "I told you." Francisca's nursing instincts kicked in. She gently pried Leo off her legs and knelt by the man. He was handsome, with a strong jawline now slack with unconsciousness. He looked powerful, even in this broken state. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, a weak, fluttering thread. She saw the wound then, a nasty, deep gash on his side that was still slowly seeping blood. She needed to stop the bleeding. Ripping a cushion from a nearby sofa, she pressed it hard against the wound, using her body weight to apply pressure. The man didn't even flinch. "We need to get him to a hospital, Leo," she said, her voice tight with effort. She fumbled for her phone, but her pocket was empty. She'd left it at the diner in her rush. There was no landline in sight. Her mind raced. An ambulance would take time, and she had no way to call one. She looked at the man's pale face, then at Leo's terrified one. There was only one choice. "Come on," she said, her voice firm. "We're taking him ourselves." Somehow, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she managed to drag the heavy, unconscious man across the floor and out the front door. Leo followed like a shadow, clutching the hem of her jacket. She half-dragged, half-carried the man down the steps and towards her beat-up car, struggling to open the back door. Getting his large, limp body into the back seat was a monumental task that left her gasping and smeared with his blood. She buckled him in as best she could, then helped Leo into the passenger seat before sprinting to the driver's side. The engine roared to life. She sped through the sleeping city, running red lights, her eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, praying he was still breathing. When she screeched up to the emergency room entrance, she screamed for help. Orderlies rushed out with a gurney, expertly transferring the man from her car. As they wheeled him away through the swinging doors, a new kind of dread filled her. She stood in the bright, sterile light of the hospital, her clothes stained with blood, her car looking like a crime scene. Leo stood beside her, silent tears streaming down his face. A woman at the front desk asked for insurance, for a deposit, for information. Francisca's hand went to her apron pocket. She pulled out the crumpled, blood-smeared mass of bills and coins, her rent, her school, her entire future. She didn't hesitate. She pushed it all across the counter. "This is all I have," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please, help him." The woman's eyes widened, but she took the money. Hours later, Francisca sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. Leo had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, his head resting in her lap. She gently stroked his hair, her own eyes dry and aching. She had no money, her clothes were ruined, and she had no idea who the man was. All she knew was that a little boy needed his father, and she had given everything she had to make sure that could still happen. She stared at the double doors that had swallowed the mysterious, handsome man, wondering if he would live, and what would happen to her if he did. The cliffhanger of his survival, and the shocking truth of his identity, hung in the air, as heavy as the silence in the room. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hummed like trapped insects. Francisca sat stiffly in the plastic chair, Leo a warm, sleeping weight in her lap. Her clothes were stiff with dried blood, a stranger's blood. The envelope in her apron pocket was now terrifyingly empty. Every cent, every dream of school and security, was gone, traded for the life of the man behind the swinging doors. A doctor in blue scrubs finally emerged, his face etched with a deep tiredness. Francisca gently shifted Leo and stood up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's stable for now," the doctor said, his voice low. "But he's lost a tremendous amount of blood, and the stab wound did severe damage. It nicked his renal artery. One of his kidneys it's failing. It's beyond repair." The medical terms swirled in Francisca's tired mind, but the finality in his tone was clear. This was worse than she had imagined. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means he needs a nephrectomy. We have to remove the damaged kidney, and then he'll need a transplant. So, without a new kidney, his other one won't be able to handle the strain. He might not survive the week." The world seemed to tilt. A transplant. That meant donors, waiting lists, a miracle. She looked down at Leo, his peaceful face in sleep a cruel contrast to the nightmare he was living. He was going to lose his father. After everything, it wasn't enough. How do you find a donor?" Francisca asked, her voice hollow. We test family members first. But according to the boy, his mother is not in the picture. There are no other relatives listed. The doctor sighed. We'll run his blood type and put him on the national registry, but time is not on his side. An idea, wild and terrifying, sparked in Francisca's mind. It was so absurd she almost dismissed it. But then she looked at Leo again, and the memory of the man's pale, handsome face flashed before her. She had already given all her money. What was one more thing? Test me, she heard herself say. The doctor blinked. I'm sorry. Test me. For the donation. See if I'm a match. Miss, that's highly irregular. You're not family. The chances are astronomically low. Please, Francisca said, and the word was a raw plea. Just test me. The little boy, he can't be alone. Moved by her desperate conviction, the doctor agreed. The next few hours were a blur of needles, paperwork, and strange, clinical rooms. They took vials of her blood, explaining it was for tissue typing and cross-matching. Francisca signed forms she didn't fully understand, her hand trembling. She felt like she was in a dream, hurtling towards a cliff edge. She was exhausted, broke, and now offering a part of her own body to a man whose name she still didn't know. She stayed with Leo, telling him stories, buying him juice from a vending machine with the last few coins she found deep in her pocket. She called her landlord and lied, her voice shaking, saying her money had been stolen. She called the diner and quit, knowing she could never go back, not with the memory of that night clinging to her. Her old life was being stripped away, piece by piece. 2 days later, the doctor found her in the waiting room. His expression was one of pure, unvarnished shock. I don't know how to explain this, he began, shaking his head. It's unprecedented in my experience. Miss Francisca, you're a match. A perfect tissue match. It's as if you were a sibling. Francisca's legs gave way, and she sat down hard on the chair. A perfect match. The words echoed in the silent room. It wasn't just a chance, it felt like fate. A terrifying, life-altering fate. The decision loomed before her, larger and more frightening than anything she had ever faced. This wasn't money. This was a piece of herself. She thought of the risks, the pain, the permanent change to her own body. She was scared. So deeply scared she could taste it, metallic and cold. That night, she sat by Leo's temporary bed in the children's ward. He was drawing a picture, a stick figure of a man, a boy, and a woman with yellow crayon hair. Is my dad going to be okay? He asked, his big eyes filled with a hope that shattered her heart. And in that moment, all her fear melted away, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. She could not let this little boy become an orphan. She would not. Yes, Leo, she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. He is. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. As she was prepped, lying on a gurney in a cold hospital gown, a wave of final panic washed over her. What was she doing? Who was this man? But then she thought of Leo's smile, and the weak flutter of the man's pulse under her fingers in that grand, bloody room. She had felt his life then, and she would not let it go. When she woke up, there was a deep, dull ache in her side. It was real. She had done it. One of her healthy kidneys was no longer hers. It was now inside him, working, filtering, giving him life. It was another day before she was well enough to be wheeled into his room. He was awake. Adriano was propped up on pillows, still pale and connected to wires and tubes, but his eyes were open. They were a startling shade of green, like deep forest moss, and they were fixed on her. The cold, dangerous man she might have imagined was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a man whose gaze held a storm of emotions, confusion, weakness, and a dawning, awestruck wonder. Leo was perched carefully on the edge of his father's bed, chattering excitedly. Papa, that's her. That's Francisca. She came when I called, and she brought us here, and she stayed with me, and she gave the doctors her money, and then she gave you her kidney. She's a hero. Adriano listened to his son's torrent of words, his eyes never leaving Francisca's face. As Leo spoke, Francisca saw the understanding dawn, the sheer, impossible magnitude of her actions sinking in. He had been saved not by a doctor, but by her. This woman, with tired eyes and gentle hands, had dismantled her own life and offered a part of her very body to save a complete stranger. Tears, slow and deliberate, welled in the formidable man's eyes and traced a path down his cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. "Francisca," he said, and his voice was a rough, broken whisper, yet it filled the quiet room with its intensity. It was the first time she had heard him say her name, and it sent a shiver through her tired body. He tried to find words, to articulate the gratitude that was too large for language. He failed. All he could do was look at her, his gaze warm and amazed, stripping away all her sacrifice and fear and seeing only the incredible woman beneath it. He slowly, weakly, lifted his hand from the bedsheet, his fingers trembling with the effort. He reached towards her. Francisca, her own body aching and vulnerable, met him halfway. She slid her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers. They were warm, strong, even in his weakness. It wasn't just a touch, it was a connection, an electric current that sealed their fates together. In that single, silent clasp, she felt his entire story, the danger, the loneliness, the fierce love for his son, and a profound, humbling thankfulness that shook him to his core. He looked at their joined hands, then back into her eyes. The look was no longer just one of gratitude. It was something deeper, more tender, and powerfully possessive. She had given him back his life. And in that moment, lying in a hospital bed, forever linked to her by blood and tissue and an act of pure love, Adriano knew, with a certainty that eclipsed all else, that his life, his heart, and his forever, now belonged to her. The silence of the mountains was the first thing Francisca noticed. It wasn't the empty silence of her old apartment, but a deep, peaceful quiet, broken only by the whisper of wind through tall pine trees. Adriano's safe house wasn't a hideout. It was a beautiful, sprawling lodge made of logs and glass, perched on the edge of a crystal blue lake. It felt a world away from the gritty city streets and the fluorescent glare of the hospital. The weeks of recovery there were a slow, sweet dance. Their bodies healed side by side, their scars, his on his side, hers on hers, a permanent, physical reminder of their bond. During the day, Leo's laughter echoed through the halls as he rediscovered his father, whole and present. In the evenings, the three of them would sit by the massive stone fireplace, and Adriano would quietly teach Francisca how to play chess, his large, capable hands gently guiding hers over the pieces. It was during one of these quiet games, the fire crackling warmly, that he finally told her the whole truth. "The men who did this to me," he began, his voice low and steady, his eyes on the chessboard, "they were rivals. In my business, there are no rules. Only power." He moved his knight, a careful, strategic motion. "I am not just a businessman, Francisca. The world I come from, it is a dark one. I have done things to protect what is mine. I am a man people fear." Francisca's hand, hovering over her queen, stilled. She looked at him, at the fierce love in his eyes when he looked at Leo, at the gentle reverence in his touch when he looked at her. This was not a monster. This was a man who had built a fortress around his heart to survive. "I understand," she whispered, and she found that she truly did. The danger didn't repulse her. It made his tenderness towards her feel even more precious, a secret gift only she received. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved," he said, his green eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My body," he said, his gaze dropping for a moment to his side, where her kidney now lived, "and my heart. You walked into my darkness and you were the only light I have ever seen." He didn't buy her a new home or pay for the best nursing school to pay her back. He did it to build a future with her. "The dream you had, climbing that mountain one penny at a time," he told her one sunlit morning on the porch, "I want to put you at the summit. Not because you need me to, but because I get to watch you shine." Their love did not explode into being. It unfolded, like a flower in the safe warmth of the sun. It was in the soft, lingering touches as they passed each other in the hallway. It was in the way he would pull her into his arms for no reason at all, just to rest his chin on her head and breathe her in, as if assuring himself she was real. It was in the slow, deep kisses they shared under the star-dusted sky, kisses that held all the promise and passion of a forever that had once been stolen from them. One evening he led her down to the dock on the lake. The water was a sheet of black glass, reflecting 1,000 twinkling stars. Leo was safely asleep inside, and the world was utterly still. Adriano turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. The moonlight carved out the strong lines of his face, but his expression was soft, utterly vulnerable. "Francisca," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me your kidney. A piece of yourself will be with me, keeping me alive, for as long as I draw breath." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm, a touch so intimate it sent a shiver through her entire body. "But you gave me back my life. You gave a father back to his son. You showed me a love that is not about power or fear, but about pure, selfless sacrifice." He looked deep into her eyes, his own glistening. "Now, my life and my heart are yours forever. They were yours from the moment you walked into my house and refused to let me go. Stay with me. Be my wife. Let us be a family." Tears of pure, unshadowed joy streamed down Francisca's face. There was no hesitation. In his arms, with Leo sleeping peacefully nearby, she had found a home more real than any she had ever known. "Yes," she breathed. "Always." As he kissed her, a seal on their promise under the infinite sky, the final piece of her old life, the fear, the struggle, the loneliness, melted away forever. They were no longer a waitress, a boss, and a scared little boy. They were Francisca, Adriano, and Leo. A family. Their love story, born from a desperate late-night call and a sacrifice that defied all reason, was now a forever kind of loyalty, built on a bond that was quite literally unbreakable. We hope you were swept away by this incredible story of sacrifice and forever love. If your heart is still beating a little faster, we need to hear from you. Subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking romances where love conquers all. In the comments below, tell us where you are watching from and share your thoughts. Were you on the edge of your seat when Francisca gave her kidney? Did Adriano's confession make your heart melt? Let us know what you felt during this powerful journey.
The city moved at a pace that was both frantic and relentless, a symphony of honking cars and hurried footsteps where everyone was a note in a song they were too busy to hear. In the very heart of this concrete jungle, on a corner that was almost forgotten by time, stood a small shop named the Gilded Petal. It was a sliver of quiet color in a world of gray, and inside, a young woman named Willow was humming a soft, tuneless melody. Her world was measured not in minutes or money, but in the unfurling of petals and the gentle scent of soil. She trimmed stems and arranged blossoms, her hands, though sometimes stained with earth, moving with a gentle precision that spoke of a deep and abiding love for her work. This shop was her sanctuary, a place where beauty was simple and tangible, and she was, for the most part, perfectly content. Outside, the sky, which had been a flat, pale gray all afternoon, suddenly broke open. Rain fell not in a gentle drizzle but in a sudden, furious downpour, slashing against the pavement and sending people scrambling for cover under awnings and newspapers. It was in this chaotic moment that a man appeared at the door of the flower shop. He moved with an unnatural stillness as if the storm dared not touch him. His name was River, and he was a man who commanded boardrooms and decided fates with a single phone call. He was, by every definition, a billionaire, but in that moment, standing in the doorway of a tiny flower shop, he felt an unfamiliar sensation: uncertainty. He stepped inside, and the little bell above the door chimed a fragile, cheerful sound that was utterly alien to him. The air in the shop was thick and sweet, a stark contrast to the sterile, filtered air of his high-rise office. He was a giant in the small space, his expensive suit looking out of place among the buckets of daisies and roses. He had come because a business associate's wife had just had a baby, and his assistant had told him flowers were the appropriate gesture. It was a task, another item to be checked off a list, and he had intended to be in and out in under a minute. Willow looked up from her arrangement, and her breath caught for just a second. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he certainly was, with a strong jaw and eyes that held a universe of unspoken thoughts. It was the sheer intensity of his presence. He seemed to suck all the air and sound out of the room, leaving only the drumming of the rain on the window pane. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. River's eyes scanned the shop, a slight frown on his face. He knew the value of companies and commodities, but the value of one flower over another was a complete mystery. "I need a bouquet," he stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in the small space. "For a new mother. I don't know what kind." A small, genuine smile touched Willow's lips. This was her language. "Well," she began, stepping out from behind the counter, "you don't want just any flowers. You want something with meaning." She moved past him, her simple cotton dress brushing against a bucket of lilies, and he caught a faint scent of vanilla and sunshine. She pointed to some delicate pink flowers. "These are peonies. They mean prosperity and a happy life." Then she gestured to some white star-shaped blossoms. "And these are lilies of the valley. They mean a return to happiness. Perfect for a new mom, don't you think?" River wasn't looking at the flowers anymore. He was watching her. He was watching the way her eyes lit up as she spoke, the way her hands gently caressed a petal as if it were the most precious thing in the world. In his world, people spoke to him with calculated words, seeking favor or advantage. Her words were pure, unvarnished passion. He was utterly captivated. "You choose," he said, his voice losing its edge of command and becoming almost gentle. "Whatever you think is best." Willow nodded, her smile growing, and she set to work. She moved around the shop with a dancer's grace, selecting stems, considering colors, her brow furrowed in concentration. River simply stood and watched, the frantic pace of his day melting away under the simple spell she was weaving. The only sounds were the rain, her soft humming, and the gentle snip of her shears. After what felt like both an eternity and a single heartbeat, she presented him with the bouquet. It was a masterpiece of soft pinks, creamy whites, and vibrant greens. It was elegant but full of joy, just as she was. "It's perfect," he said, and he meant it in a way that went far beyond the flowers. He pulled out a sleek, black credit card, the kind that had no limit. As she rang up the purchase, a bold, unprecedented idea formed in his mind. An idea that defied all logic and business sense. He didn't just want to buy the flowers, he wanted to buy the world that created them. He wanted to buy the sunlight in this shop. As she handed him his receipt and the bouquet, he looked directly into her eyes, his gaze intense and unwavering. "What's your name?" he asked. "Willow," she said, her heart fluttering strangely. "Willow," he repeated as if tasting the name. "My name is River. How would you like to own this flower shop?" The question hung in the air, so absurd and enormous that Willow thought she had misheard. She let out a small, nervous laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" "The gilded petal," River said, his tone now all business but his eyes remained soft. "I am purchasing it. Right now. And I am giving it to you. It will be yours completely." Willow stared at him, her mind reeling. This had to be a joke, some strange prank. "You can't be serious. You don't even know me." "I am always serious," River replied. "And I know enough. I know you have a passion that money can't buy. I would just like to make sure it never has to be extinguished." He placed his business card on the counter. It was heavy, thick cardstock with only his name and a phone number embossed in silver. "The lawyers will call you tomorrow to arrange everything. It's done." He turned to leave, the bouquet in his hand looking both ridiculous and perfect against his tailored suit. But he paused at the door, the bell chiming once more. He looked back at her, standing there in stunned silence amidst her flowers. "There is one more thing," he said, and for the first time, a hint of vulnerability crossed his features. "I would like you to have dinner with me. Tonight. No business. No talk of shops. Just conversation." Willow's head was spinning. Fear told her to say no, to run from this overwhelming man and his impossible gestures. But something deeper, a curious and brave spark within her, looked into his lonely eyes and saw not a billionaire, but a man standing in the rain. She took a shaky breath. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll have dinner with you." A real, true smile transformed River's face, making him look years younger. He simply nodded, then stepped back out into the pouring rain, leaving Willow alone in the shop with the scent of flowers and the echo of a promise that was about to change her life forever. The days that followed the rain-soaked encounter unfolded for Willow like a dream from which she was afraid she might wake. The lawyers did call, their voices crisp and professional, and the transfer of the gilded petal was executed with a dizzying efficiency that left her the official legal owner of the little shop that had once only been her place of refuge and work. It was a gift so immense it felt like a new weather system had settled over her life, one she was still learning to navigate. Her first dinner with River was not in a loud, crowded restaurant where people might recognize him, but in the quiet, book-lined library of his home, a vast space that felt more like a peaceful fortress than a house. They ate simple, delicious food and talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily and naturally as its namesake. He asked about her childhood, her dreams for the shop, and she found herself speaking of things she had never told anyone. In return, River began, piece by careful piece, to let her see behind the imposing billionaire facade. He spoke of his love for classical architecture, his frustration with a particular business rival, and his secret, guilty pleasure for old black and white movies. Willow watched as the stern lines of his face softened when he laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that was a low, wonderful sound she quickly grew to love. He started to appear at the shop not in his imposing suits, but in dark jeans and a simple sweater, looking less like a titan of industry and more like, well, just a man. He would sit on a small stool, often getting in her way, and simply watch her work, asking questions about the flowers, his presence becoming a familiar and comforting part of her day. One evening he took her to a charity gala. It was Willow's first step into his world, a dazzling universe of crystal chandeliers, designer gowns and conversations that buzzed with power and influence. She felt like a small, plain sparrow among a flock of brilliant peacocks, her simple dress feeling woefully inadequate. She saw how people approached River with a mixture of fear and fawning admiration, their eyes calculating how best to use him. But throughout the night, his hand never left the small of her back, a steady, warm anchor in the swirling sea of strangers. When a particularly arrogant man made a condescending remark about her being charming and quaint, River's entire body went still. He didn't raise his voice, but the icy, quiet authority with which he put the man in his place was more terrifying than any shout. He turned to Willow, his eyes full of a protective fire, and whispered, "You are the most genuine person in this entire room. Never forget that." In that moment she didn't feel like a sparrow anymore. It was after this event, back in the serene quiet of his home, that the true depth of their connection began to bloom. They were standing in his spacious living room, the lights of the city twinkling like a carpet of stars far below them. The tension that had been building between them for weeks, a sweet, aching pull, was finally at its peak. He stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, and she could feel the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her dress. He turned her slowly to face him, his dark eyes searching hers in the dim light. The air was thick and electric, every nerve in Willow's body feeling acutely alive. He leaned down, his voice a husky, intimate whisper that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "From the moment I saw you in that shop," he began, his thumb gently stroking her cheek, "I knew I was lost. You have this innocent, beautiful soul, Willow, and it calls to something deep inside me." He paused, his gaze holding hers captive. "I want to know every part of you. I want to fit my every inch into your innocent body and your life. Let me love all of you. Let me in, completely." The words were not a command but a fervent, heartfelt plea. They were a promise of intimacy that was as much emotional as it was physical, a desire to intertwine their lives as thoroughly as their bodies. It was spicy and intense, yet layered with a profound reverence that made Willow's heart swell with a powerful, trusting love. She didn't answer with words, but simply rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his in a searing, unequivocal answer. The kiss was a beginning, a tender exploration that quickly deepened into a consuming fire. It was a night of slow, deliberate discovery, where whispered confessions were exchanged between caresses, and two separate lives became inextricably woven into one. In the quiet, hazy stillness that followed, wrapped in the safety of his arms, River finally let the last of his walls crumble. He spoke into the darkness, his voice raw with a vulnerability he had never shown anyone. He told her about his childhood, not in a mansion, but in a cramped, cold apartment where the sound of his parents worrying about money was the constant soundtrack of his youth. He spoke of the shame of worn-out shoes and the relentless hunger to be more, to be secure, to never, ever feel that powerless again. "I built an empire out of that fear, Willow," he confessed, his face buried in her hair. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but it never filled the empty space. It never made me feel loved. Not until I walked into a flower shop on a rainy day and saw you." Willow listened, her heart aching for the lonely boy he had been. She turned in his embrace, her hands gently cupping his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes, full of unwavering love and acceptance, held his. "You don't have to be the powerful billionaire with me," she whispered, her voice firm and clear. "Just be my River. That's the man I fell in love with." And in that moment, under the gentle glow of the moon, River felt a final heavy chain of his past break and fall away. He was seen, he was known, and he was loved not for what he had but for who he was when he was with her. The billionaire and the flower girl had found their way to a common ground, a private garden built on trust, and it was more valuable than anything else he had ever owned. The world for River and Willow had been recolored. The towering skyscrapers of his life no longer seemed like cold monuments to power, but rather pillars holding up a sky that was now infinitely brighter. The simple flower shop was no longer just a place of business, but a sacred ground where a miracle had occurred. Their love, tested and proven in the intimate spaces between his confessions and her acceptance, had settled into a deep, unwavering current. They were two separate trees whose roots had become so entwined underground that they now stood as one stronger forest, able to withstand any storm. Yet, as is often the way of the world, a storm was precisely what was brewing, one that would test the strength of those very roots. The trouble came in the form of a man named Silas Vane, a former business partner of Rivers from his earliest, most ruthless days. Silas was a man carved from ice and ambition, who had been left behind in the dust of Rivers' meteoric rise. He had watched Rivers' transformation with a cynical, sneering disbelief, and the news of Willow, the humble flower shop girl who had tamed the great River, filled him not with joy, but with a bitter, calculating envy. He saw her not as a person but as a vulnerability, a crack in Rivers' previously impenetrable armor, and he decided to drive a wedge into it. One afternoon, as Willow was arranging a vibrant display of sunflowers in the shop window, Silas entered. He was all sharp angles and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He introduced himself as an old friend of Rivers and proceeded, with the subtlety of a poisoned dart, to paint a picture of the man Willow loved that was monstrous and unfamiliar. He spoke of cutthroat deals, of broken promises, of a cold-hearted ambition that crushed anyone in its path. "He's not the man you think he is, my dear," Silas said, his voice slick and patronizing. "He's using you as a pretty distraction. A man like River doesn't change his spots. He's just found a new, more pleasant cage. When he grows bored, he'll discard you and move on. He always does." For a moment, Willow felt a cold dread trickle down her spine. The stories were so vivid, so detailed. But then she looked at Silas, truly looked at him, and she saw the emptiness in his gaze, the hunger for chaos where there was peace. She thought of River, not the billionaire, but her River, the man who secretly loved terrible reality television, who got flour on his nose when he tried to make her pancakes, whose eyes held a quiet awe every single time he looked at her. She thought of the vulnerable boy he had trusted her enough to reveal. She straightened her shoulders, her gentle eyes hardening with a fire Silas had not anticipated. "You are wrong," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a conviction that filled the entire shop. "You speak of the man who built an empire out of survival. I know the man who built a home out of love. You see a cage where I see a sanctuary. You think you are telling me secrets, but you are only showing me the ghost of a man who no longer exists. I fell in love with the man who bought flowers in the rain, not the legend you are so obsessed with. You don't know his heart. You have never known his heart, and you have no power here." Silas, for the first time in a very long time, was speechless. He had expected tears, doubt, and fear. He had not expected this fierce, unwavering loyalty. He left the shop, defeated not by a business rival, but by the simple, unassailable power of love. When Willow told River of the encounter that evening, she expected anger, a desire for retaliation. Instead, he gathered her into his arms, his embrace tighter than ever before, and she felt a shudder go through his powerful frame. When he pulled back, there were unshed tears in his eyes. "For my entire life," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "people have tried to get close to me to take something. You, my brave, incredible Willow, you stood up to protect me. You are my partner. You are my heart." It was in that moment, seeing the profound effect of her defense, that River knew the final shape of his future. He had been planning it for weeks, but now the timing was perfect. He didn't choose a grand ballroom or a jumbotron in a stadium. He took her back to the very beginning, to the gilded petal after hours. The shop was filled with every flower she loved most, peonies, lilies of the valley, sunflowers, and roses, their combined scent creating an intoxicating perfume of their journey. The soft glow of fairy lights twinkled like captured starlight around them. He led her to the very spot where he had first seen her, where her innocent world had collided with his jaded one. He took both her hands in his thumbs stroking her knuckles, and he got down on one knee. He looked up at her, his face illuminated with a love so pure and certain it took her breath away. "Willow," he began, his voice steady and deep with feeling. "You walked into my life like a sunrise after a lifetime of gray. You saw the man behind the money, the heart behind the armor. You turned my world from a stark black and white ledger into a brilliant living garden of color. You are my peace. You are my home. You are my forever. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a stunning yet elegant diamond ring that sparkled in the soft light. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Willow's face. There was not a single moment of hesitation. Yes, she breathed, her voice cracking with emotion. 1,000 times yes, River. Forever. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and as he rose to kiss her, it felt less like a beginning and more like a completion. Their wedding was not the society event of the season, though it certainly could have been. It was a gathering of their true friends, held in a garden, surrounded by the very flowers that had brought them together. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of patience, of laughter, of standing together against any storm, and of always choosing each other, every single day. As they were pronounced husband and wife, and River kissed his bride, the guests saw not a billionaire and a flower shop owner, but simply two souls who had finally found their missing piece. Their life unfolded like the most beautiful story, a tapestry woven with threads of shared mornings in the flower shop, quiet evenings by the fireplace, and the eventual pitter-patter of little feet. River never again felt the cold emptiness of his old life, and Willow's world, though now filled with luxury she had never dreamed of, remained grounded in the simple, profound love they had built. They had discovered that forever wasn't a distant destination. It was in the daily choice to love, to trust, to build a life where a powerful river and a graceful willow could grow together, forever intertwined, their love a sheltering canopy against the world. If you were swept away by the journey of river and willow, and you believe in the power of love to transform even the most guarded of hearts, then you won't want to miss the stories to come. Subscribe to the channel to be the first to experience our next tale of passion, promise, and forever. Your next unforgettable romance is just one click away.